Welcome to the Freedom Cities podcast, where we explore bold new ideas in city building and improving regulation in the United States. Hi, Alex. Welcome to the Freedom Cities podcast.
Hi, Mark. Thanks. It's great to be here.
So can you talk a little bit about your background and what is it you're working on?
Absolutely. I'm working with a company in particular, Tipolis is the name of the company, and it's in the business of building new cities around the globe, all modeled around a private contractual nature of governance that really offers governance as a service and tries to transition more towards that view of the world. While it is focused around the world, obviously, working in the United States is quite attractive to us and for that opportunity. My background in particular is really in finance. I'm the CFO of the company and really working on, all things from the sort of controlling side of the company, accounting and tax compliance and these sorts of things, all the way to the, more finance end of the company in terms of fundraising, shareholder relations, structuring of these sorts of projects, that type of work.
So how'd you get into charter cities, free cities, and what so far been your experience in terms of negotiating with governments and investors to get these projects started?
I originally became interested in them. I was working in investment banking in Chicago out of college, doing a lot of reading on the side. I mean, investment banking was a great profession in many ways, but not maybe the most intellectually stimulating. And so I was doing a lot of reading on the side. I happened upon a book called Free Private Cities. It was written by my now boss, Gebel, and that really opened my eyes to really taking my, I would say, broadly speaking, libertarian perspective and applying it towards the world. Being a believer in free markets and humans, I wanted to, do something that could actually make the world better. And that was, one great way to do it. Of course, after starting with Titus and at that time what was called Free Private Cities, became quickly familiar with you and your work at Charter Cities, and sort of the rest has been history. In terms of my experience with negotiating with governments and investors, I would say with governments, we've seen over the past 5 years or so of doing this, the transition from this being a quite marginal concept. Some of the more desperate countries that are looking for investment, that are looking to attract, qualified immigration into the country. Now we're seeing a transition, I guess, to a little bit more mainstream world where this sort of concept is pretty well respected as a sort of evolution of what special economic zones have been for decades. And so I think that's really exciting that we're starting to see that in more developed countries, and I think it'll come probably last to places like Europe, but it's very exciting to me to see places as well developed as the United States are even taking ideas like this seriously, as I think that there's a lot of value and benefit. On the investor side, I think it is still a little bit of a new sector. It is a little bit of a crossover between, venture capital and real estate, which are quite different in terms of risk return profiles. I think it certainly gives quite a bit of upside, but it is a bit of a challenging environment, I think, to solve for the funding equation for projects like this because they are so large scale. And they can scale, but they don't scale quite the same way that a typical venture, a Silicon Valley type venture would. So it is a challenge, but I think we're even seeing greater adoption in that world as well.
Great. I guess what parts of the world have you seen as kind of most receptive to this messaging? You talked a little bit about how it's become a little bit more kind of normalized and mainstream. I mean, if there's any project details you can share, obviously we'd love that. But if not, just like how have you seen the conversations change on kind of a granular level?
Well, I think in terms of just where these sorts of conversations were happening, it used to be really pretty exclusively Africa and then some of the more difficult countries in Latin America in terms of Human Development Index and that sort of stuff. The places like Honduras, where you're, of course, very familiar with Prospera and Ciudad Morazan. Nowadays, we're seeing places, that are a lot more advanced. Of course, the one that comes to pretty much everyone's mind would be like an Argentina with President Milei. Of course, that's obviously quite interesting. It is one of those countries where I would say it's, in some ways a tier above where past conversations have been, but there's still a lot of value and benefit that these sorts of projects can bring. That's sort of where we're seeing the conversations go. They're also happening pretty much all across the globe. I mean, certainly Latin America is one hotspot. Africa, there's plenty of conversations going on, and you're probably more familiar than I am with that particular region. We're also, interestingly, having some initial conversations in Asia. Just recently, our company Tipolis announced a project in the country of Brunei, which is a quite wealthy monarchy over near Singapore. It's really, a phenomenal country in terms of investment infrastructure. It's a bit like being in Singapore, and they're looking at this project as a way to, help open up the country a bit more towards international investment and economic development that's a little bit more diversified. Their past is very much in oil and gas. That will continue to be a big part, but this is a way to expand the sectors really that are playing a big part in the future of Brunei. So it's a very exciting announcement for us, and it's relatively hot off the presses.
Great, thanks. And so you mentioned kind of the U.S. previously, but kind of how have you been thinking about kind of working in the U.S.? What would that look like, and like how would Freedom Cities play a role?
Sure. I think, the United States it's a very difficult country to wrap your mind around how a project like this, could work. Obviously, it's a very powerful country. And so I would say, honestly, historically, I've sort of been slightly skeptical, maybe that things like this can happen in the United States, at least in the short run. It's why Tipolis, in many ways, is focused outside of the United States. I do think that there's a great opportunity for this in the United States. I don't know how likely I think it is, but I would very much urge, the people in charge to take a very serious look at this. One of the great things about the United States is maybe it doesn't have to, go quite as far as other countries do. It's already, a tech capital of the world. There's more money available for investing in projects like this and for new ventures here in the United States than anywhere else. And so in many ways, Freedom Cities here are the threshold in which they need to have, attractive features for investors and entrepreneurs to pursue them. The bar is somewhat lower here in the United States, and that makes it somewhat easier than to, pass whatever legislation is required in order to make a Freedom City possible. So I think that makes me slightly optimistic. We'll see. And I think, it's a great way really to unlock what we like to say is typically these sorts of projects are bringing investment, jobs, and these sorts of things that would not otherwise come. And I think that also holds true in the United States. Obviously lots of people are coming here to do a lot of different types of businesses, but I think that this is one way that you can really unlock advanced manufacturing, things that have left the United States to some degree or another. As well as then, of course, staying on top of innovation in various sectors, which the United States has historically done, and I would advocate for continuing.
So let's say the U.S. passes the kind of like ideal legislative package for Freedom Cities from your perspective. Give us kind of the best case scenario. What does the U.S. look 20, 30 years down the line? How does America benefit from Freedom Cities, and what role do you and Tipolis play in the development of those cities?
Sure. Well, I think the amount of Freedom Cities that we can have, I think, is actually quite high. I mean, 10 is a fine number, as is probably 50, quite frankly. I think you guys at CCI have done some good work on, even if you make these pretty substantial sized cities, it's still just a tiny, tiny fraction of the federal land. Not to mention, of course, that I would also agree with you that, private owners of land should be able to contribute the land in some way, shape, or form to this. I would say that, in 2030, the ideal law would allow as much of the relationship, of the governance relationship. So what I mean by that is the regulatory landscape that people are operating in, the who makes the rules about what, how disputes are resolved, these sorts of questions. As many of those decisions should be between the developer or the operator, however you want to define it or set it up, of the Freedom City and the people who join the Freedom City. So I think that's what helps get you out of the multiple layers of oversight that are often more check-the-box type regulatory constraints rather than serious regulatory constraints. So I would say as far-reaching as you can go in that regard would absolutely be the best. Noting that absolutely political realities must, play a role. what does it look like in 20, 30 years? I do think there can be probably, I would say if we started out with maybe 10 freedom cities, then probably, I don't know, 5 of them are reasonably successful. And by reasonably successful, I mean that there are tens, if not hundreds of thousands of people living in each of them, that they're kind of agglomerating in a sense of, this one is sort of attracting this type of person or entrepreneur. I'm a big believer in agglomeration effects. So I think that's probably how it's going to evolve. As for what Tipolis brings to the table, I think we're happy to play any role possible. Our view would be if there's a form of Freedom Cities legislation out there, we would like to, of course, look to effectively apply to be one of them. And we would, of course, purchase land or, find some agreement with the federal government to transfer that land and then bring in the capital required to cultivate it and develop it into a city. I'd say one minor little thing that what I would call in Tipolis's wheelhouse is building really quite beautiful, livable cities. That's a big focus of ours. Certainly, our team is fairly European, and so we've learned a lot from the history of European towns in terms of architecture and building heights and these sorts of things about how you create an environment that is not just attractive from a regulatory landscape, which is, of course, quite important, but also how do you create an attractive living environment from a physical place, from a place that people want to spend time. And I think that would be, one of the most important focuses from Tipolis in particular.
Great. Thanks. Good luck on your projects around the world in Brunei, and hopefully America gets Freedom Cities legislation so we can build some here.
Looking forward to it. Thanks, Mark.
This is Mark Lutter, and thanks for joining the Freedom Cities podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more conversations.